Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new episode of Stoneshard Podcast, Episode 3, starring yours truly, DarLeeLlama, as well as my co-host and friend, Beardodood. How you doing, Beardo?
Hey everybody, Beardodood back with another episode. This time we're moving past the one-handed weapons and branching off into the two-handed. But before we get started, just a friendly reminder to hit the like button and subscribe both to our channels, to both of our channels, just to give us a little extra support. So moving forward, going into spears. Spears they're a pretty ancient weapon. Definitely they're around way before swords and other more elaborate weapons. They're very utilitarian, and that they can be used for hunting and not just for warfare. I guess as soon as people figured out how to make knives, they looked at the stick and they just threw a knife on top of that, and then we got spears. In Stoneshard, the spears basically come in two different varieties aside from the attribute points assigned to them, and that they do piercing damage as the default, but some of them also do slashing damage, which is pretty accurate to different models of spears that exist and the different ones that are in the game. You probably first thought I had when I think of spears is the movie 300 with Leonidas throwing spears and all the different Spartans just going ham on the Persians. There's many other representations I'm sure we can think of. So starting off, we're going to be looking at the skill Nail Down. Nail Down is based on strength, agility, and perception. It delivers a strike to the legs with a critical chance based on your agility and your perception. If the target is adjacent, the strike receives an additional bonus to based on your strength, as well as a knockback chance based on your strength as well. So meaning if the target is right next to you, you have a high likelihood of knocking them back. If the target is a tile away, the strike receives 30 plus, depending on your strength, body part damage, and also has a high immobilization chance based on your agility and your perception. If this skill immobilizes its target or is used against immobilized targets, the skill's cooldown is reduced by 4 turns. It has a hidden bonus of 20% accuracy, which is quite nice, and the standard passive bonus of minus 4% to the cooldown durations for other abilities in the tree. So what do you think of this one, Darley?
This is the bread and butter skill. I feel most people will look at spears and they think, oh, this is what they're going to be using. You know, they're going to nail me down and they're going to basically destroy me at a distance. I find it really interesting, the stat spread for this particular skill. It seems like it is equal parts dependent upon strength, agility, and perception for different things. So if you wanted to ignore your knockback, you could ignore getting strength. But because it has such a high ratio, you might not want to do that. You might want to have a very high knockback, particularly with how great knockback is for stunning opponents. I was just using Nail Down and I was completely massacring them, and I think a large part of that is because of that bonus crit added to the strike. I love having crit on my abilities, and I love having knockback, so this is definitely a highly rated ability for me.
Well, and there's also the added effect that we can finally attack multiple tiles away without having to have an actual ranged weapon, which is nice. But like you said, it is interesting that the different modifiers are all pretty spread out. Agility and perception affecting that crit chance, strength affecting the knockback, and general damage if they're close. But strength, agility, and perception all coming into play if they're far away. So this is definitely a go-to. How would you rate this one, Darley?
Like I said, I think it's the bread and butter skill of the tree. If it's not a 5, I don't know what is. But
Yeah, it's a good point.
It's going to be pretty weak to begin with, until you get more stats that buff it. When you get more stats that buff it, you're really going to see exactly how good it is. I mean, if you take a close look at the skill, it does everything in a lot of ways. I mean, it has the crit chance. It's got the bonus damage. You know, it's got the knockback chance. It's got body part damage, immobilization chance. It slices, it dices. You know, I mean, it's really good, but it's also very situational. You know, they need to be where you want them to be in order for you to use it. If they aren't, get them there. You know, it's really good. 5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, and the only drawback that I could see is the fact that you have to rely on 3 different stats, and usually you're already you're already in a tough spot in that you're only getting 2 stats per level. So I know a lot of people are very careful about how they spend those points. At the same time, perception does give a bonus not just to range and stuff like that, but also to crit chance and to accuracy.
Perception?
Yes.
But that would only be for ranged. Oh, you're talking about within the skill itself.
Well, I'm saying that if you put a point into perception, it's not just for range stuff. It also gives bonuses to crit chance and to accuracy.
I would make the argument in this case that going agility and strength spread is better, because anything in this skill that perception does, agility does just as well. So
definitely,
you can do what this skill really means to me is it's very open for a variety of builds. Let's say you want to go into someone who is primarily ranged character. You know, this skill does not hurt you for having a ton of perception. In fact, it benefits you. But if you want to have a melee only spear guy, right, you go strength and agility. So that's even going to show just how great this skill is, because it supports a versatile spread of abilities. You can either go agility perception and stack up the crit chance, or you can go strength perception and do a strength close range perception ranged option, and likewise with agility perception. So it's very good for a variety of builds. It supports a wide variety, I feel, and that's what's great about it.
Yeah, definitely. And before we move into the next skill, I did want to mention that, as you can see on screen, the main focus for the spear, and this was pretty much stated by the developers when they released it, is on immobilization. So this is one of the few weapons, other than I believe crossbows, that actually has a pretty high immobilization chance. And what immobilization does, for anyone that hasn't quite ventured into spears or hasn't taken on any spearmen, is that it will stop you. You're not able to move or use any of your skills that are gap closers or would move you around. And it also eliminates your dodge chance. So it is a very scary situation to be in if you are a dodge heavy or very reliant on dodge. The other thing too is because the way that nail down works, you're really going to be shooting for the leg parts. Even though it doesn't necessarily say that, it says body part damage, you're going to be aiming for their legs. It's the whole point. You can see in the picture the little avatar for the skill. And I actually included the leg injury and the severe leg injury to give you an idea. We kind of talked about it last time, that each injury has a different stack of what it will affect, and most of them are pretty related to the body part that you're hitting. So with the leg injury, you can see that, you know, dodge chance, agility, noise produced, those all pretty much make sense in the grand scheme of using the spear. So I just want to throw that out there as we move on to the next skill, Impaling Lunge. Impaling Lunge delivers a strike in a 2-tile line with strength modifier to body part damage, strength and perception modifier to armor penetration, and an agility modifier to bleed chance. If the affected target is immobilized, these bonuses are doubled. So if you use nail down, this is just going to knock them down even harder. It has a hidden bonus, 25% accuracy, and has minus 4% cooldown duration for the ability tree, which is pretty standard. So what do you think of this one, Darley?
Every melee needs to have some kind of gap closing ability, and Spears is no exception. However, the fact that they don't have one isn't necessarily super detrimental to its playstyle because of its ability to do more ranged attacks. Already having Nail Down have a range of 2, and then supplementing that with Impaling Lunge of range of 2. I said before, when it came to axes, Mutilating Strike barely counted as a gap closer. Well, Spears gets away by not having it, by having 2 ranged abilities. And it works, you know. It may not be the most ideal, but for getting around, you know, the battlefield. But that's exactly what Spears are not supposed to do. You're supposed to set the charge and wait for them to come to you. And that's exactly what this ability does.
Yeah, it's very similar. It's very similar to Mace's in that you really want to control your positioning before you start the battle. Especially when we get later on and we look at some of the passives and the other skills related to Spears. But as you said before, Nail Down and Impaling Lunge are basically the bread and butter of Spears. It is nice that right away you're able to get the 2 main attacks for the Spears. You don't have to spend a bunch of skill points going down. One thing that I kind of had a misconception of when I first started, because I didn't do a crazy amount of research right when Bolt Thrower came out, was that I would maybe just focus on one of those trees, because it is an interesting skill tree in that it actually branches off from the beginning point of the skill. I know we kind of had that with swords, with blade maintenance, but this is different in that I originally thought maybe I just do Impaling Lunge and I just try to get down the tree, but you really do need Nail Down and Impaling Lunge.
It kind of reminds me of the idea that there are 2 existing schools of fighting, and then they kind of converge into one. So you've got 2 different styles of spear strikes, but they all end up being heading in the same direction for their final form, so to speak. Uh-huh. Whereas, like, for axes, there's only one way to swing an axe, and it's hard. So,
yeah,
with spears, you can either nail them down or you can thrust forward. I think that's kind of where they were going with on that. That's my opinion, at any rate.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. It's an interesting way to see the skill tree branch out. All right, so moving on, we'll look at...
I just want to say real quick about that ability is that it also kind of provides the things that the other ability does not. This does body part damage, armor pen, and bleed chance. So you kind of, again, you have basically everything that you've been wanting in a strike, depending on the kind of strike you want to output. So...
yeah,
Spears covers all bases. And that's what's great about it.
If you're going into the battle, you're definitely going to be looking at Nail Down. And even if you get ambushed and you've got 2 or 3 guys around you, it's really nice to pop off Nail Down, get one of the guys pushed out of the way with some damage, and be able to focus on the other ones. And even then, you can also use Impaling Lunge in that same regard to kind of push them back. I've noticed that I have seen a knockback effect from impaling lunge and not just from nail down, even though it's not explicitly stated in the skill.
Yeah, agreed. And definitely when it comes to bleeding, there have been so many times where bleeding has saved me in a fight. And it's nice to have it on an ability that you can rely upon to have an extra chance to get that off.
Well, especially you cannot, you get some free turns of them having the bleed when you knock them back, and they're stuck in place. So, yeah, I think it's definitely the tree, the spear skill tree definitely gives a lot of variety to combat, and was definitely, I definitely like playing it. I did so with Belmir when Bolt Thrower came out, and I really enjoyed it. I almost thought it might have been a little bit overpowered, but that does kind of lead into the main controversy surrounding spears, and that's the desire for all spear attacks to be able to be 2 tiles away. I'm sure that you saw this discussion, Darley. What are your thoughts on the range, the 2 tile range only being applicable for the skills as opposed to even basic attacks?
Well, I think I'm a little biased when it comes to this because I've done LARPing before. That's live action role playing, and I've gone up against spear users as a sword user and etc. And they don't have any extra length unless you're using one that is super big and long. And those people aren't using spears; they're using friggin' pikes at that point. When you have a spear, you basically are really kind of bunching up in the middle, and your attack range isn't that greater than a sword. In fact, most of the time you're disadvantaged against people with a shield. So I think it's fine to have spears attack adjacent, because that's what would be most like in real combat. The fact that they can use abilities to do 2 spaces away just is an indicator of the skill of the person who has trained with a spear. So I like it as it is, to be absolutely honest. I might be an unpopular opinion there, but it is what it is.
No, I actually agree with you on that, especially playing spears. I could see the complaints of it, oh, well, it's awkward because you knock them back and then, you can't do anything and they're just sitting in front of you. And then if you move forward, you're going to get attacked. But I think it just plays more into, like with maces, just having a real solid plan of attack and how you're going to take on the enemy. And I mean, worst case, if you're really wanting something to be able to hit them with outside of your spear skills, I mean, you might as well dip into pyromancy or something like that, just so you can, while you're sitting there, if you're really that impatient for the enemy to come, that you can just pop off another skill. Although I would generally advise against that and say you probably want to just keep your skill points within, the spear skill tree or one of the other combat related trees.
You mean athletics?
Yeah, athletics or combat mastery is really.
I feel like going athletics is basically what people want. People who want to use spears at a range of 2 all the time, they really want to fight as if they had athletics. They just don't want to spend those points. Because, like I said, with the live action thing, it was all about keeping distance if you wanted to be able to use that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I mean, there's a difference between having a normal spear and a spear that's like super long and not super unwieldy. At that point, you call it a pike. But in my personal experience, that's what they had to do. You have to keep distance. So if you want to play it like spears should have a range of 2, my recommendation is pick up dash, and then roll yourself. Dark Souls, roll away, and constantly spam nail down and impaling lunge, and walk away. I mean, there's something to be said about tactics in this game, and using kiting as a tried and true method. I'm currently playing a ranged playthrough, ranged only, and I have to basically walk away all the time, kiting them away. That's a WoW term. I don't know if people all know that, but you get aggro from a character, you kind of you attack them at range, and then you walk away until your skills come back, and then you do it again, and you walk away until your skills come back, and they're always at a range from you. It's very safe to do. So that's what you would do. You'd basically wait till they're 2 turns away, nail them down. If it fails, roll away. Get your cooldown back. They come at you again, nail them down. If it works, then you use Impaling Lunge. You've gotten 3 attacks on them. That's exactly how people want it to play. So just do that. But use the points to do it. Other than that, in my opinion, spears aren't meant for close range combat. Or 1 tile away is fine to me, I should say.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think we're both on the same page there. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the comments. If anybody disagrees with us, be sure to let us know below. We'll definitely be reading those. So moving on, we'll get into the first passives of the tree, which is Precise Hits. Your attacks receive a 5% immobilization chance. Attacks against immobilized targets receive plus 10% accuracy, plus 20% body part damage, and plus 5% crit chance, with a passive bonus of plus 3% accuracy. What do you think of this one, Darley?
So this is kind of the equivalent skill that a lot of our skills have, where you get a straight bonus towards what your weapon is supposed to do. And this basically boldface tells us that, the makers want spears to be able to root your enemies down and basically play with them at a range, right? So this is actually very, very useful for spears. I feel it is a very necessary talent to take, because when you get in the later stages of having spear, being able to immobilize with even normal attacks and then basically roll or walk away can give you that extra bit of range. I mean, even if you don't have dash, let's say I walk up to somebody, I immobilize them, and then even if they do end up getting an attack on me, I am now at range, and I can start using my range abilities. In particular, we have 2. They're at the very basic levels. We should already have them at this point. And we can basically abuse that. So I feel like stacking any kind of immobilization for a spear is a great skill. Just as good as like the plus to bleed on the sword skills. So I do like this ability. I rate it highly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you don't really have a choice either way. You're going to have to take it just because if you want to advance within the tree, I mean, I guess you could if you didn't want to hit the far left of the tree. But this is a very good one, especially for what you're going to be doing anyways. You're hitting people with nail down, which since this is directly below it, it definitely complements that skill very well. So yeah, as far as passives go, I rate this one very highly as well. So moving on, the next passive that we have, which is underneath Impaling Lunge, is Stay Back. Upon moving to an adjacent tile, enemies receive minus 25% piercing resistance for 1 turn, 15% chance to perform Impaling Lunge instead of a basic attack. So this is a pretty interesting passive. What do you think, Darley?
I have a love-hate relationship with this ability, it seems like. I mean, it's a passive. You have it up all the time. But I feel like I never get that Impaling Lunge. So it's like, why did I put a point into this skill if it's not going to proc? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, on my playthrough, I definitely noticed a number of additional Impaling Lunges, which in and of itself is quite unique. I don't think there are any other skills, at least none that we covered, that are a passive that will trigger an active skill, even though it's a low chance. I'm with you in that, while the first passive precise hits is pretty definite in what you're going to get, the stay back is a little bit harder to trigger. But
I know this skill is good, right? I know it's useful, I should say, because, upon moving an adjacent tile, they receive minus 25% piercing resistance. I mean, that basically means you're doing more damage to them, And that's good. That's always good. But, for one thing, they have to have the piercing resistance, otherwise it's no good, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, this skill is not as great against, say, unarmored. No, wait a minute. It would be, because you can go negative. All right, I'm wrong about that on my immediate impression. But, like I said, when the Impaling Lunge performs, it's great. But, it seems like I'm always using abilities at a range, and they go down, from my abilities at range more than a basic attack, it seems like. So, and again, there's only a 15% chance to do it. I know this ability is good. It's my experience with it has not been stellar, to the point of me going, oh my god, this is a great ability. This is definitely one of those ones I would suggest we get more opinions from people about with their experiences, because for me, Stay Back has not been, it's not been bad. Don't get me wrong. Right? That's what I'm trying to say. It's not been bad. It's just it's not been great for me. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, and then you also have the dilemma in that getting to the final and probably most overpowered skill in the tree, you're gonna have to get stay back regardless.
Yeah, you have to pick it up regardless. But I just feel like when it comes down to it, I'm always picking the other three basic skills first, and this always gets left last until I absolutely have to put that point into it. But that's just my experience.
No, I agree with you. Like I said, it is fun though when you do trigger it and out of nowhere you say, "Oh, I just hit another Impaling Lunge." So I think there is kind of that fun factor to it, especially since it's a passive.
Yeah, I think I'm low rolling is all. I'm low rolling it.
Probably.
So
the RNG gods are not looking favorably upon you. So.
Exactly.
But all right, so moving on to the next skill, the next active skill in the tree. Just gonna start off our third row here is Maneuver. Maneuver moves to a targeted tile and reduces active cooldowns for this ability tree by 1 turn for each enemy within a 4-tile range. After that, grants the effect of Maneuver for 5 turns, which gives minus 10% damage taken, plus 10% block chance, and plus 10% counter chance. Each cooldown reduced by the skill grants an extra stack of the effect. It has the typical minus 4% cooldown duration for the ability tree. What do you think of this one, Darley?
So, I think I heard you wrong. It's not you move 4 tiles. I think you only move 1 on Maneuver, right? You only move 1 tile.
You only move 1, but it reduces the cooldowns based on the number of enemies within a 4-tile radius. So it reduces each cooldown by 1. So if you had 4 enemies around you and you used Maneuver, you would reduce the cooldowns for Nail Down and Impaling Lunge by 4.
This ability is actually quite good. This ability is kind of like a replacement for the Gap Closer to a certain degree. Because, we're not getting the Gap Closer, obviously. This still lets us move around the battlefield without actually trying to go to get dash. And it's really nice for that because it gives you a bunch of defensive stats. I'm more excited about the defensive stats we get from this than anything else. So, obviously you want to fight at range with a spear, but sometimes you need to get in there. You got no choice. Let's say you want to run down the Necromancer before he starts popping off on you. Or an archer, and you know how much I hate archers. So, sometimes you need that. And this can be really good for that. Obviously, it's not going to help with like magical stuff, but like minus 10% damage taken. I mean, it helps with that, I should say. The block chance, the counter chance. It's just a good skill, in my opinion. I like it.
I'd say it's almost ideal for ambushes, or if you are taking on a lot of enemies at once. This is definitely one that I kind of overlooked when I was playing. I really was trying to focus on the final skill that we're going to look at. But yeah, it's an interesting sort of replacement for the gap closer. Is definitely a nice skill to have, and definitely one you don't want to pass up if you're building out a spear build.
It reminds me of old or Parry before they changed it, where you got like a bunch of like counter and block and stuff like that, and then you also get a step with it. I mean, how good is that? And it reduces cooldowns. How great is that? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it also stacks, so you could be having even higher block chance and a counter chance and minus damage taken. So yeah, it's definitely, and if you're in a bind or in a tough place, this is a go-to for sure. But moving on to our next passive, which is right next to maneuver, no retreat. Staying put on the same tile grants minus 5% cooldown duration, plus 3% block chance, and plus 3% crit chance for 4 turns. This effect stacks. Moving to a different tile resets the bonus. The passive bonus is plus 5% move resistance. What do you think of this one, Darley?
So this is kind of the counterpoint that the skill tree makes to its own self, and that instead of using maneuver to get defensive stats, we're now using staying put. We're staying in the same tile. This is really the skill that signifies planting your feet and telling the enemy, come at me, right? That's how I see it, at any rate.
Yeah, I mean, I almost this one, along with the next one we're going to look at, which is the stance, I almost see these the whole idea of standing in the same spot, as in you're going to position yourself before the battle starts, but once things start getting real hairy, then that's when you would start popping off maneuver and trying to move away. That's kind of how I see maybe like the dichotomy between these two skills, since they seem kind of opposite to each other. Why would you want a passive that says, hey, if you stand in the same place, the longer you stand, the more powerful you are? And then at the same time, there's another skill that if you move, you're going to get more defensive boosts to yourself. So
this kind of reinforces what I said earlier about the first two active skills, in that Spear does it all, right? If it doesn't do it with one skill, it does it with a different skill. So in the first skill we just saw, it benefits you with maneuver to move and fight, and then this one, it benefits you to stay and fight. And when I think of this ability, I'm actually thinking a lot of that one ability from, I believe it's Combat Mastery, where you get bonus damage. I want to say you get bonus damage, right? When you pass a turn, combo that with this, where you're getting a bunch of defensive and crit. On top of that, even if you're getting ambushed, you get all that crit and all that bonus damage. It can basically lead to a huge wallop on the enemy. And that's
I hadn't thought of that. So the skill you're talking about in Combat Mastery is called Setup, and it's right after you can get if you get the defensive stance, you can get this one. It gives the damage boost, but it also gives accuracy boost. And I hadn't really thought of pairing all of these different skills together, and that's a really good one for spears, especially because if you use Nail Down, you're typically going to have the guy stand in place. You can just skip a turn, wait for him to move forward, and then just hit them real hard with an impaling lunge.
Yeah, I always forget about setup, but when I saw this skill, I was like, actually, that would be really good with setup. So this reinforces the whole plant your feet thing, and setup was basically made for that.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, going into the next one, the next skill, which pretty much feeds off of this one, is Pikeman's Stance. So this is the stance-based skill for the spear tree. Every tree has one. This stance-based skill activates for 3 turns with the following effects: plus 5% damage, plus 7.5% bleed chance, plus 7.5% knockback chance, plus 7.5% immobilization chance. Using this ability's trees, using abilities from the skill tree grants 1 stack up to 4 stacks, and then remaining on the same tile prolongs the duration of the effect by 1 turn up to 15 turns, while basic spear attacks decrease its number of stacks by 1 turn. And then the typical passive of minus 4% cooldown duration for all the abilities in the tree. What do you think of this stance, Darley?
So I'm a little biased at the moment because stances in general have fallen pretty far away from me, I feel. I don't care for them too much, to be honest. I feel like they're too hard to ramp up anymore. And I don't know. I've not had good experiences, I should say, with playing with them as of late. That being said, okay, this is probably one of the better stances for a tailored skill tree that you're going to get, because it pretty much gives you everything that you want anyway. You want better damage. Damage is great. You want better bleed. You want better knockback. The bleed is okay, but like the knockback and the immobilization, you pop this up as a instant buff. Even if you don't ramp it up, it's still plus 7.5 of each of the things that you really, really care about, and that's going to be knockback and immobilization. So, I mean, this is a good skill. This is a good stance, but I'm a little biased towards the stances in general right now, so...
Yeah, and I do agree with you. I've noticed that too. It's either... They might be better if you're lower level and you're taking on harder enemies, but once you get to a certain point, I noticed this. I got, on my Axis build I'm doing, I already had defensive stance from Combat Mastery, and I finally got Massacre. And I noticed that when I popped these 2 off, I pretty much killed the enemy within 1 hit, if not 2 hits. Which is nice, not to have to rely on using your abilities because, you can fumble or they cannot trigger properly. But no, I agree. But this is one of the better ones, especially because it's easy to set up. If you stay in place, you're pretty much just going to keep the stance until you move. Even if you're doing basic level attacks, because you get +1 for standing in the same spot, while you get -1 for using a basic attack, which I think that's pretty typical for the stances, how they go down. No, actually, I think when they go down, they just go down normally per turn, and then a regular attack actually boosts them, and then the abilities do stack it like it does on this one.
Mhm.
But I do agree. I think this is really well suited to where the developers of the game wanted spears to go and how you're going to use them. And yeah, I definitely use this one a lot when I was playing.
Yeah, I would basically say it's good pre-buff, right? I wouldn't attempt to use it in the middle of combat. I don't feel like it's that important. But it's a good pre-buff, and that's basically all it's good for. So this doesn't rate super high on my rating system, simply because it is simply a buff to me. And even though we use it a whole lot, it's not stellar in the same way that, a bread and butter skill would be. Bread and butter being the one where you're basically just using it all the time. and it's giving you a ton of effects, like either of the basic actives. So it's basically a 3 for me, a 3 out of 5. It's not that it's bad, it's just not, amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and I could almost see if you were for some reason to skip nail down and you're really focused on the final skill underneath it. I mean, you're gonna have to get pikeman stance anyways, and we've seen some skill trees where you can skip the stance, but this is one where you absolutely need it to get the best of the passives. Yeah, I would, along with just about every other stance, I would rate it around mid range. It's helpful when you're low level, but once you start getting high level, I mean, you're not even looking at it anymore. So, and this is definitely not a good skill. This is probably, while this one does complement the tree very well, this is probably one of the worst stances to pop off when fighting against the troll, because the troll will require you to move around quite a bit, and he will even force you to move if you're not wanting to. So this is a completely useless skill at the end game when you're going to fight the troll.
I think the spear's strong point against the troll is the fact that it does have range 2 ability, melee attacks, so they kind of have that natural advantage. But then they have,
It's funny because at the same time, the skill underneath it is absolutely necessary to take on the troll, but we'll get into that in a few slides here. So we'll move on. We'll go on to the next passive in the tree, and this one is called One at a Time. It grants 5% damage and 3% block chance for each adjacent enemy, and gives +3 to block power. What are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
What can you say about any kind of passive that just kind of gives you great stats straight up? And, I mean, we already love combat mastery type offensive tactics and stuff like that, and that's basically for each enemy within your visual range. This is the same thing, except it's only adjacent. I mean, it's not going to be as good as that, but it's still good. You get bonus damage, you get bonus block. At the very minimum, you're getting, from this talent alone, 6% block. From the passive of an adjacent enemy and from the passive bonus itself. I mean, and block is always useful. The fact that we're not using a shield makes block even more important. Particularly if you end up getting like block enchants, block plus enchants, you can basically become a blocking machine with a spear. So I like this one a lot because it gives good stats. It gives good stats, and you can reliably count on those stats. And the fact that they buff up even more depending on how many there are means it's scaling. That's even better. I like this ability.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit conflicted. I think while I can see the possibility of blocking with a spear, I think it's a little out of place with all the other skills. And it definitely doesn't give the same bonuses compared to the other passives we looked at. And seeing as it is at the end of the tree, depending on your build, I would say by the point that you're looking at the skill, you're probably to the point where you're not going to have more than one adjacent enemy unless you're really just looking for ambushes. So this is typically one I passed on this one.
There's the human skill. There's the human dungeon though.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good point. Front,
that is the place you tend to get like always swarmed.
Yeah.
So.
But I just think in the grand scheme of things, I might end up looking at getting another point in combat mastery or athletics compared to spending it on this one.
That is a very fair assessment, and I agree with you. But I do want to say I rate this highly because I like to do strength agility builds. And if you go strength, that's when you're pumping up your block. So I might be a little biased in that respect as well, in that I'm only thinking about builds that I would use that incorporate strength primarily. So if it was in a build where we're not going a spear with any kind of block, I think all spears have some form of block though, don't they?
I'm
No, mine
not
does not. Mine
sure. I
does not.
think
So
I think it's like most weapons, where some of them do and some of them focus on crit and other things like that. I mean, I definitely see your point, and it is kind of just cherries on top of all the other things that you can get from spears. So I could see using the point, but at the same time, if you're looking at the tree and you're saying, well, I don't really want to spend all of my points in the tree, this is definitely one that you can overlook, in my opinion.
in my assessment, the caveat is: are you using a block spear? Are you pumping strength? If you're not doing either of those, definitely skip it.
Yeah,
Since
if
it's
you're looking to just do critical damage and that's your main focus, then yeah, I would agree. If block is what you're trying to push for, then this is a very nice passive to have.
Agreed.
All right, so moving on to the final active skill in the tree, and in my opinion, probably one of the weirdest and hardest ones to actually trigger is determination. Determination delivers a strike with perception. Let me see. With a perception modifier to damage and an agility modifier to bleed chance to each enemy who will move to an adjacent tile during the next turn. It has a minus 4% cooldown duration for abilities in the tree, so pretty standard. But the skill is currently bugged. If you're in the game, it will say that it's modified by strength, agility, and perception, but it is in fact not affected by strength in any way whatsoever. So something important to keep in mind. What do you think about this skill, Darley?
It's funny because I just used it. Well, not right this second, but I used it before coming into this particular dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has its uses. You know, it's one of those things that requires some setup, right? You can't just spam it willy-nilly and hope, you know, that you're going to land it luckily. You know, you have to, like, I find the most success with this ability when I see that I've nailed them down or I've done an ability when they're a tile away, and then they decide that's the time they're going to raise shields or do some other ability. They're going to do a buff, and that means there's still clearly a space between them and me, and I don't necessarily want to use an ability right away. I can use this, let them step on me, and then they get smacked in the face, and that still reserves my impaling lunge, or well, I've already used nail down, but it reserves my impaling lunge for the attack after determination. But you are right; it can be hard to land. I'm not ever going to deny that, but it has its uses, but in particular for bleed. If you can land the bleed on it, it's actually quite good. But compared to the B&B, the bread and butter, it falls behind. It falls badly behind. You know, the difficulty of landing it just makes it not nearly as good. So
yeah, I think so. Basically, I was in a weird position where I wasn't playing a permanent with Belmir, and I was in a dungeon and I got this skill and I tried to use it a number of times, but I was running into that issue where I wasn't paying attention to how long the person was immobilized, or when I popped it off, that's when they decided to use raise shield or an ability such as that, or maybe they had spears and it's just a bad experience on my end. It's very similar to the sword skill. I forget I think keeping distance, but the difference being that you don't actually move. That's why I always thought keeping distance is a little bit easier to time, in that if you're one-on-one with a guy, then if you fly back a space, there's a high chance he's going to follow. But when they're one space away and you're nailing them down, or you're waiting for them to advance, it can be tricky to time exactly when they are going to advance.
Yes, so, I also drew that comparison too.
Yeah, so when I played that build, I actually ended up dying after getting the skill. So when I went back in and I leveled up, I definitely passed on it. I think I put a point in combat mastery, or I got the final passive in the skill tree. which we'll actually go into now.
I find this determination is quite skippable, because of the bread and butter skills. So, like I said, if you absolutely have to have another source of bleed, and even that's only really if you go high into agility, skip it. I would say skip it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to see what kind of effect it would have if you pair it with maneuver. It is interesting that we've got two skills in here that are really based on your positioning and stuff, but that is kind of the main point of having spears, is it's very heavy on your position, much like when we play maces.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So we'll move into the final skill. Definitely the best in my opinion, might even outshine the other active skills in the tree. Wounding Spearhead. Spear crit deals extra damage equal to 4% of the target's current health. Passive bonus plus 5% crit chance. What do you think of this one, Darley?
The crit chance alone, I love any ability that's going to give me crit chance, to be honest. You're going to find a lot of bonus crit in a lot of the variety of trees. It seems like every weapon-based one has one. So automatically that passive makes me happy. But the fact that your spear, like, crits deal percent to the health, this is a boss killer through and through. You definitely were correct in saying this is the ability that we're really looking towards on taking down the troll, because it's going to shred his HP. I think that's the term that a lot of RPGs use for that particular thing, HP shredding. And the fact that it takes off a whole 4% makes this very good. Against standard enemies, they would have to be pretty tough and have a lot of HP, like late game, humanoids and stuff like that, for this to give you a bigger bang for your buck. But that's what the crit's for. The crit is useful all around. And then the fact that it also feeds into this ability makes it even better. I love this ability. Very highly rated, 5 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, hands down, 5 out of 5. Got to be the best, which is strange. The other ones I've picked actual active skills, but this is hands down my favorite. And like you said, when you're, especially if you're running permadeath and you're taking on the end bosses, whether that's the necromancer, the gentleman you took on screen, or the troll, getting that percent damage off of their health is pretty huge, especially if you can get a crit off early in the battle. When I fought the troll using Velmir, I actually got a crit of, I think it was like 250 damage or more, which was ridiculous. And I actually ended up kind of just concentrating on basic attacks rather than using nail down and impaling lunge, just because of the crazy amount of damage I was doing.
Yes, this is definitely the boss killer. Definitely you want to have this if you go any sort of crit whatsoever. And honestly, you should be trying to get crit whenever you play any kind of melee weapon, in my opinion. Just because the crit effects can be so strong on their own right. And it's even like, I mean, for example, Spear's critical effect is 100% immobilization, right? Like, you're guaranteed to immobilize them, and at that point, you basically do with them as you will. You can walk away, let your stuff. I just got ambushed again against by even harder enemies. At that point, you just kind of walk away and wait for cooldowns or do whatever you want. It's really up to you.
But yeah, so that wraps up the different skill trees. We'll briefly go over the weapons, and then we'll move on to our second part of the discussion, which will be staves. All right, so looking at the different spears, we got the Stoneshard wiki pulled up. Like Darley said, the critical hit bonus for spears is a 100% immobilization chance, which is quite nice. There's not really any super standout spears. You can really start off with any ones that you find. They definitely tier up. They have different abilities between crit chance. There are some that have daze and stun, which is actually the Guten Dog, if that's how you say it. It's actually the only spear with crushing damage, which is quite interesting. And the only one that has.
I think if any of them stand out is the Guten Dog.
Yeah, it's definitely a good starting spear. But if you end up with the Militia Spear or Peasant Pitchfork, they all, like I said, they're pretty close to doing the same type of thing. As you get down, I don't remember any of them truly standing out. It starts to become whether or not you want if you want basically the two distinctions between spears, which are they're focused on the pointy end, or they have a pointy end and they also have a sword-like sharp edge to them, so to allow for piercing and slashing damage. And that slashing damage is going to kind of add to bleed chance as opposed to just doing kind of critical damage. But I mean, going through them, what I ended up using towards endgame was actually the brandy stock. That's pretty easy to obtain, and I actually use that against the troll. It has a nice bonus crit chance, crit efficiency, and bleed chance, along with the accuracy. Also, along with the armor penetration and body part damage. A number of the ones that are lower down, I think they are available, but some of them I do not believe are available in the game. For instance, the spear used in this gameplay was the Spontoon, which is hilariously listed as Spoontoon in the wiki. I have not come across that one. I think the farthest I've seen is, I think, the Fouchard fork, and maybe a couple of these other ones.
Is that with maxed out rep too?
The Spoontoon, the Fouchard fork was maxed out rep. Someone may correct me in the comments, but a number of these I don't think are available currently.
They can be hard to spawn. When I was playing axes, it was really hard to get the heavy broadaxe to spawn over the broadaxe. And since there is a difference between the two, I mean, sometimes you may just have to sit there and reload, and hope the merchant, finally brings it up.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know I've seen the Scorpion Halberd. I'm pretty sure I've seen Scorpion Halberd.
Yeah, that one is pretty funky looking. I probably have seen that one. But I do think a few of these are not, they may be in the game, but I do not think all of these are obtainable, much like we've seen in the other weapon trees. Supremacy of Flame, or some of the lower, the higher tier axes or maces. Or I think maybe daggers is the only one where everything that you see you can get in the game. Do you have any thoughts in particular about the spears?
I usually went Guten Dog, as we mentioned before, but I'm a sucker for daze and stun. And it has higher penetration stats than these other beginner spears do. So, ranking 58. It has 58 penetration. And it has accuracy. I like that. Typically, I switch over to, for mid-range, I might go to War Pitchfork. Just because, as you said before, when you start trying to do damage only, we go for the bleed, accuracy, and crit chance type things. And that's kind of what you had said was your final choice when it came to a weapon. You used where is it at? I'm looking for a brandy stock.
Right
and
there.
The brandy stock does the same thing, except it has a very nice +4 crit, +20 efficiency, same amount of bleed, and more accuracy. Late game, it's really whatever you can find. And I usually see Scorpion Halberds. So, Scorpion Halberd is was my go-to, and that's more of a block weapon with counter. But that doesn't mean it's not it's any good. You know, it's still really good. But
It looks
at
cool
that point,
too.
I just feel like you're trying to get whatever high damage weapon you can. So
yeah, it's true. I may need to play a little bit more with my finished out Velmir to see if I find any of these other cool ones. But I did want to add probably one of the best weapon names, the early on spear, the Man Catcher. I always have to joke about that when I find that one. I mean obviously,
it has a whopping 15% mobilization, which
yeah,
is great, right?
Yeah, it's pretty nasty. I just like the title, the Man Catcher. Just sounds funny to me, I guess. But
yeah, I think that is from. I know that the Japanese had spears like this, and I know they're probably represented as well in European style weaponry.
I mean, I think that kind of goes with the rest of the spears. They do, not that they have, not that they're inaccurate or anything, but another number of them do have pretty silly looking shapes to them, even though they probably are accurate and were used. Yeah. It's funny to think of somebody using a Man Catcher and actually catching a person with all those spikes in between them and just kind of holding them in place, I guess, or pushing them off and just slicing them up.
It's not actually meant to slice up flesh, although it can do that. It's meant to entangle in pants.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then you kind of catch them. Now, they do make it where, you can deal injury to them as well, but that's one of the reasons why the damage is so low. It's representative of that this was more of you grab their legs, prevent them from moving, and then someone else goes in for the kill.
That makes sense.
Yeah, this was more of a squad-based weapon, not an individual person's weapon. Or a not magistrate, but a constable force or something.
It is nice to see that it must be pretty true to the actual weapon because the stats are really low. There's not really any reason you would use this weapon compared to the other spears. Mm-hmm. Even the low tier spears are gonna have are gonna be much better than this.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I usually go for War Pitchfork, so
yeah, I think we've got a pretty good recap of the spears. So next we'll move on to the staves.
I will say one last thing about spears is the Watchman Halberd. If you ever go to Manshire's Castle, they drop a lot of those. So if you're looking for a free weapon, you can always go pick up one from those guys if you can survive.
Yeah, I always think of that too because I was thinking for my my maces build, I was like, man, I should try to hit up to get the Warhammer outside of the final human Manshire dungeon, and then at the same time, I was thinking, yeah, that's probably not gonna happen. I'm probably gonna get murked trying to get it for free. So. Mm-hmm. All right, now we'll move on to staves. Staves, much like spears, are definitely a very old weapon type. You can imagine the first caveman finding a large stick fallen from a tree and using that to bash people's heads open, or really any other purpose, whether that's for walking or help keep balance, or even there's probably tons of other reasons why you would use a large stick like a stave. And then, of course, whenever you may think of a stave, you're probably thinking of, much like what they're used for in Stoneshard, is for wizards. The most famous one, of course, being Lord of the Rings. You got Gandalf. None shall pass against the Balrog, smashing his staff down and breaking the entire bridge. So staves definitely pack a large punch and can deal a lot of damage and are almost deceptive in that regard. And within Stoneshard, it's definitely the case. The main damage type that they do is crushing damage, as opposed to spears. They'll do piercing and slashing. And then on top of that, most of the spears have additional traits that will amplify magical abilities. So definitely a mainstay for any aspiring sorcerer or sorceress in the game. So, having said that, moving on to the first skill in the skill tree for Staves is Hail of Blows. This is modified by strength, agility, and willpower. So the first weapon tree that we've seen, and I believe the only one that's affected by willpower. It strikes 2 times with a negative damage modifier by agility. The first attack has a willpower energy drain modifier. The second attack and third attack are modified by strength and agility, giving it a daze chance. And if both attacks connect... Oh, okay, I read that wrong. The second attack has that modifier. If both of the first and second attack connect, it strikes for a third time with a negative damage modifier to from agility and a positive knockback chance modifier by strength and agility. There's a hidden bonus for the first 2 hits. It has a 10% chance, 10% accuracy, and minus 15% fumble chance to just make sure you get that, give you additional bonus to get those hits off. It also has a minus 5% cooldown duration for skills in the tree. It's also been noted in the wiki that the skill can't knock back the target for the first 2 strikes. The knockback only occurs on the third final strike if you land it. What do you think of this skill, Darley?
So, talking about, when we were talking about spears, I was talking about bread and butter skills, and this is definitely the bread and butter skill of Staves. It's when you're playing Staves at all, you're going to be relying on this skill a lot. That being said, you can have a love-hate relationship with the skill as well, simply because of the RNG when it comes to actually landing that third blow. And I feel like the third blow is the most important, simply because of the knockback feature and how important knockback is. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely one of the more interesting skills in that, first off, it's one of the few that actually has a negative modifier on it. So you really need to level agility to cancel out the negative modifier. But also that it delivers potentially 3 hits. 2 hits alone is unique, but being able to do that third one and get the knockback chance, I think it really gives a clear opening and understanding of what you're getting into with the Staves, with the skill tree. I haven't personally played with Staves, but I could see this as being very highly rated. Not just that it's the first attack, but it might be one of the more important attacks in the skill tree.
Before the inclusion of dual wielding, I believe this ability held the record for the most attacks on a single enemy at 3, even though there are big negatives to it. But the interesting thing about that interaction is that it has the ability to proc multiple instances of damage. And considering that a lot of Staves have bonus types of damage, you can quickly rack up magical damage using this, just by having magical damage on the weapon. So finding a weapon with a high amount of magic damage attached to it, and then adding even further magical bonuses to it with enchantments, Hail of Blows can get pretty crazy with its additional damage sources.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting part of it too is that each of the strikes does different things. The first one is an energy drain strike. The second is for daze, and the third final one is for knockback. So if you were lucky enough to land all of those, I would think, especially for the first skill in a tree and what you're going to be starting with, it's pretty It's pretty good.
It's definitely a good skill, but I do have that caveat of you can have hate-love relationship depending on whether or not you land that third strike, because there's just plenty of times where I found myself like begging the game, give me that third strike, give me that third strike. Definitely. I feel like the more accuracy you have and less fumble, this skill gets much better, because if you're able to accurately always land those first two ones, you will always land the third hit. And that the third hit is what makes this skill truly shine, I feel, because you get that nice knockback, which has its own combo potential, and you just get that extra damage. You want to get accuracy. You want to have good fumble if you use the skill.
Well, I imagine too, if you get them dazed on the second strike and you hit them for knockback, you're probably going to get them into a stun situation, and then you can just kind of have your way with them.
I don't know if these strikes are actually crit capable. And that's one thing about staves, is that it shares with greatswords, is that if you crit with a stave or a staff, it hits 3 adjacent tiles. So if you have 3 guys next to you and you actually get crits, you can basically just supreme cleave through 3 people at one time. The possibilities are high.
Yes, it is definitely an interesting first skill. To add on to that, much like we were seeing when we were looking at maces, the main, I guess, debuffs you're looking to put on your enemies when you're using the staff is stun and daze. Daze basically makes the opponent not able to use abilities, and also ramps up their ramps down their knockback resistance, stun resistance, psionic resistance by 25%, and increases their fumble chance. And that's really the setup. Once you daze them, if you have them cornered against a wall, or you just have a high chance for getting another daze, you'll push them into the stun debuff, which basically gives them 0 dodge, 0 chance to counter, 0 block chance, and their psionic resistance goes negative 50%, and they can't do anything. So much like with staves, they're probably going to find that positioning is also very important, although we found that when we were looking at the spears as well, compared to some other weapons like the axes. So I just wanted to throw that in there as we move into the second skill, which is one of the first passives for the tree, is called Destabilizing Hits. Knocking enemies back with staff attacks applies plus 25% damage taken for 3 turns. It has a minus 5% cooldown duration for abilities in this tree, and plus 5% chance of knockback. What do you think of this one, Darley?
So we talked about a similar skill in spears, and that was the one that gave plus 5% immobilization. And whenever you're talking about a particular weapon and its capability, usually this particular passive is going to be the one that helps define a weapon's role in the game. This one indicates, obviously, that the role of staves is knockback. Maybe not to the degree that some other abilities can do it. For example, kick seems to be the most reliable knockback ability in the game, but as a weapon, staff wants to be known for knocking back people, because this ability procs off of it. It procs off the knockback, and it gives you a flat 5% chance. I highly value knockback as a player, and the fact that this gives a bonus 25% damage to the enemy makes it even better. That being said, I can see where people would not want to have to deal with knockback all the time, even though it might buy you time or turns. So it may be easy to say, I'm going to pass this ability up, but I would not recommend that. I feel like this ability overall is very good, but then again, most of the abilities, it's a matter of priority. You know, which abilities do you want to get that are going to be the most effective at any given time? Definitely, this is worthwhile. I don't know how high in the priority list it can be, but I always suggest picking it up.
Well, and the way that the staff skill tree works, which is interesting to look at, it's almost like an inverse of the spears. But having the first treaties, you're only going to have access to this and Hail of Blows. You're going to have to wait for the next two ones until you get Staves 2, and then I believe the last 4 unlock with Staves 3. So it is something to keep in mind. I do agree, you know, if you're going to be using the staff and you want to be using that to deal damage, there's really no reason why you would skip this one unless maybe you are a mage and you're just looking to hold the staff and not really interested in spending points in here, because there's so many skills in the different magic skill trees that you're probably going to want to focus all your points there. But having said that, if you're looking to do damage, this is definitely a nice passive to have.
That is exactly what I meant by priority, and that you might be prioritizing not just other skill, or you wouldn't be really prioritizing staff skills. You'd be prioritizing skills in other trees. So that is definitely the point.
I think
to think of when picking the skill.
Yeah, and in regards to Hail of Blows, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the interesting effects of this that's not really listed in here, I believe on the third strike, if you knock them back, you actually move forward with them, don't you?
They might have taken that out. I'm not reading it at the moment for Hail of Blows. Strike 2 times for damage. First attack, energy drain. Second attack, daze chance. If both attacks connect, strike for the third time with a high knockback chance. I've been using it, and I don't think I'm actually moving forward. So
okay, I thought that I had seen in the past other people play it, or maybe even I just used it as a one-off.
I think that was the case, but they might have changed it. But I know at the moment when I'm playing right now is not the case.
Yeah, because I was going to say that's I don't think that there's many knockback abilities that will actually follow the opponent into the next cell and allow you to keep attacking them. Most of the knockback is just to knock them back, and then if you want to fight them, you're going to have to move forward towards them. So it was something that I was curious about. But
I seem to remember that. I think that's on the target, but I don't know. It's hard to remember at the moment for me.
Yeah, and I haven't played Staves yet either, so if anybody wants to let us know in the comments if we're right or wrong on that. I'd be interested to know. So moving on to the second passive skill in the tree, once you unlock the second treaties, Battle Trance. Critical strikes with staves reduce this skill tree's active cooldowns by 1 turn and replenishes 10% max energy. Passive bonus is minus 5% cooldown duration for this skill, which is pretty common, and plus 5% crit chance. What do you think of this one, Darley?
I think this is possibly the best passive in the whole tree, tied only by a later passive, which is one of the in-game keystone abilities or passives. This pretty much has the ability to completely negate your need for energy if you have the crit. And the fact that it also gives you crit makes it very, very valuable in my opinion. Definitely worth the talent point. Definitely worth the wait. I thought it used to be 20%, but I might have been mistaken on that on my memory.
Well, it's possible. I didn't see anything on the wiki, but they did the same thing to the trait in maces that does the same kind of thing. But I did see in the Discord that while they changed the text, it actually does still give 20%, even though it says 10% on the skill.
So that is something. It's 20%.
It might be. I didn't see any note on there specifically, but it's quite possible that it used to be 20% and then they just changed it recently or nerfed it.
Whether
Probably
it
in
is
one
or
of them.
not, 10% is amazing because it's 10% of your maximum energy, and obviously the more energy you have, the better. So this gets, the skill gets a little bit worse when you have heavy armor one, but it's not going to be so detrimental that it doesn't see some use. If you have crit, if you're doing a crit, like an agility based staff build, which is very popular, your crits can get pretty crazy with any weapon. And the fact that this gives you your 5% crit, which usually I've seen at the end of trees more often than the beginning of trees. But if you get it that quickly, you're critting a lot and all the time. So you are constantly getting your energy back. Top that on top of the fact that this reduces the tree's cooldowns. I remember you telling me when you were dual wielding with axes, you said it was a game changer when you actually got an ability that reduced the cooldowns as well. This is the same thing, except it procs off every single crit. You can hail with blows forever using this, because hail of blows is on a fairly short cooldown, and if you're critting all the time, you're keeping it on that short cooldown, and that's 3 attacks per turn. So that's really good. Combo this with one of the later game abilities we're going to talk about, and it gets insane. This is one of the reasons to play staff, in my opinion.
Yeah, I did change my mind after the fact from the last podcast when we were talking about the axe passives. I believe the passive is called Reprisal, but I found that since I was dual wielding and using Flurry of Blows, and I already had the passive on that one, that it would basically reduce the cooldown to 0 if I killed the opponent, I actually began setting up to where I use the axe skills first, and then I would use Flurry of Blows, because with the axes I was guaranteed to do body part damage, and that's what activated the negative cooldown. So you got like -1 cooldown for each body part that you damaged. So if you're doing 4 blows with an axe, you're probably gonna get at least 1. So yeah, I'm a big fan. Yeah, I'm a big fan of any skills that reduce cooldown. The only problem at that point becomes how much energy you're able to get, which is actually kind of negated by this, because you're actually getting energy back along with the cooldown, and you have the crit chance. So yeah, I haven't played with it, but I would say this is definitely a very highly rated passive overall.
I agree 100%. I rate it very high. Very, very high. Personally.
Alright, so moving on to the next skill is our next active. Step Aside. This one is modified by Strength and Agility. So this is a bit of a gap closer. Charges towards the target and then hits all adjacent enemies with a plus Strength and Agility damage modifier and plus Strength and Agility knockback chance. Reduces cooldown duration for the skill tree by 1 for each knocked back enemy. The hidden bonus being plus 10% accuracy, minus 15% fumble, and the normal minus 5% cooldown duration for skills in this tree. What do you think about this one, Darley?
So, to my knowledge, this is the only skill that has the potential to be a safe gap closer. Once again, gap closing being any ability that makes you charge towards your opponent. You close the gap so that you can fight them. The fact that this has a very high natural knockback chance means that you can attack them, knock them back, and they cannot do a retaliatory attack. Instead, they either sit there doing nothing, or they have to use that their action, which comes after yours, to actually walk up upon you, back up on you again. So this is the only one that I know of that allows you to basically close the gap safely without with the potential to allow you to close the gap safely and not take damage if you manage to proc the knockback. That alone makes it super worthwhile.
Yeah, right? I mean, even then, the knockback chance is crazy just on the base. So let's say you just started the game and you're able to get this. You're going to have at least 10 strength and 10 agility. So that plus 40, you're going to have a 50-50 chance of knocking back. And that's probably going to trigger for every single enemy. So you're going to knock back at least one. If there are 3, in fact, you'll knock back at least one of them guaranteed. So yeah, I hadn't actually looked at this one, but this one is pretty strong. And then of course, lowering the cooldown duration again. It just seems like this tree is just setting up for constantly wailing on people with these skills.
Yes, I'm definitely a fan of any ability that reduces your cooldowns in general. Not just by percentage, but like by 1 point or 1 turn per. So I agree. The tree is definitely set up to be able to kind of do chaining combos of its abilities. You have the ability to just do basic attacks, but I feel like by the late game, you're spamming abilities instead of basics. It's got a range of 3, which automatically makes it good in my eyes because it has the average range. I consider 3 to be the average range for gap closing. And the only instance that I have any negative thing to say about this is that it's a little harder to hunt animals because you're knocking them away, and they naturally want to run away as compared to come and fight you. So. But yeah, that's my only negative about it. I like Step Aside very much as an ability.
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty small negative point against it compared to all the positives. So, yeah, I think both rating this one pretty highly, and it is mandatory if you want to get to the end of the tree. So, I mean, it's a skill point well spent. So, moving on to the bottom branching path here, we go to our stance-based skill called Unwavering Stance. Unwavering Stance activates the following effect for 6 turns. Minus 5% damage taken, plus 15% fortitude, plus 7.5 block chance, plus 7.5 knockback chance. Using skills from this tree grants 1 stack up to 4. Basic staff attacks prolong the duration of the effect by 1 turn up to 15 turns, but decreases its number of stacks by 1. It also has the common passive bonus of minus 5% cooldown duration. What are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
So one thing that staff so far up to this point has lacked, it has been defense. Hold on, I've got a kitty kind of walking around my setup here. I don't want her to stop our recording. It's been lacking a little defensive wise, right? A lot of multi-hits, a lot of, utility abilities so far, and passives. This is basically supposed to make up for that. Again, it's a stance-based skill. So I've mentioned before, I have a certain bias towards them at the moment. So I'm just going to look at what it provides, right? The damage taken, excellent. It's always good to take less damage. Gotta take a drink, 1 sec. It's always good to take less damage, and that's just a really nice stat to have. Block chance, Very, very good defensive statistic, but you need to have block points in order to make that effective. And then knockback chance we always want for staff, because that's, again, it's kind of its role, right? Knockback is one of its roles. As a crushing weapon, it likes to knock back people. I hate the fortitude part of it, though. I think the fortitude part kills it for me, because I don't like fortitude in general as a buff, because all it does is it reduces the amount of time that something sticks to you after it's already been applied. And that at 50% at best means only a turn or two. So we're talking like bleed, we're talking like curses and stuff like that. And most of the time you can wait out curses, you know. Most of the time you can just bandage up your bleeding or even wait it out, you know. It's only when you're at really low life that bleeding can be, you know, worrisome. I don't particularly like fortitude, and I definitely don't like it on an ability that only lasts around 6 turns to begin with. How useful is that actually going to be before it actually runs out? So I hate that aspect of unwavering stance. That's my opinion.
I was going to bring up the fortitude. It is very strange to see it on the skill, on the stance, and definitely lowers its overall rating compared to other ones. Like Darley said,
because you're basically like, you know, standing against the waves type deal. You know, you're not wavering. You're basically being rock solid. I get that aspect, but I still hate it. I hate it so bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those kind of secondary skills I think most of us ignore unless you see it on a piece of equipment or you get the enchantment. You're like, oh, what does that do again? I don't remember, because every other type of ability or skill or whatever is added to your equipment is so much more effective than fortitude, unless you were getting like a crazy level of fortitude. But I guess maybe that needs to be discussed as well. I've never really actually looked to see how fortitude plays out. Like, is it a 15% chance to knock one skill off, or is it like if you're at 25%, not one skill, but one turn off? Or is if it's like you hit 25%, that's one turn off. You hit 50%, that's 2 turns off. I'm actually not really that familiar with fortitude, so there might be some hidden benefits that we're just not aware of.
It's certainly possible, and I'm sure that fortitude will have its time to shine in the future. But on a skill that doesn't last all that long, I don't see the point. You know, there's nothing exciting about having that actually on a stance. So, definitely not my favorite. Thankfully, it has damage taken, block chance, and knockback, which are all great for staves. Otherwise, I would be really upset at this skill.
When I think getting to this point in the skill tree too, depending on how many points you're going to put into is really the deciding factor. Is the following passive actually does complement this very well, in that it does add block power. So it does kind of go along the route here of having the additional block power. Block chance. But like you said, I think this is definitely one of the lower rated stances. Definitely lower rating than the spear stance that we looked at.
Agreed.
All right, so moving on, the final active ability in the Staves skill tree is called Peacemaker. Peacemaker hits all surrounding enemies with a negative 30% damage and a strength and agility daze chance, or modified daze chance, and then you retreat to a chosen tile without triggering attacks of opportunity. And if you're not familiar, an attack of opportunity would be if you are next to an enemy and you retreat back, they're able to hit you, which can be very painful if you're trying to retreat. So that's what an attack of opportunity means in this instance. It also grants negative 10% abilities energy cost for 5 turns for each enemy hit. It has a hidden bonus of minus 15% fumble chance and has the all too common 5% cooldown duration for abilities in this skill tree. What are your thoughts on this one, Darley?
So this one seems to be an interesting combination of different skills. Automatically, we're reminded of keeping distance, right? For the swords.
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
you retreat one tile, and then if they step on you, you attack. And this one, you attack and then retreat one tile. So it's kind of automatically better in that respect. It's just you're taking a negative to damage instead of getting a bonus to damage. If you could predict it, keeping distance would be better in that respect. What's different about this one, though, is that it also has the ability to apply daze. Now, depending on how well you're good, or how well you are capable of getting your opponent to a dazed state to begin with, it has a relatively high daze chance. I mean, to begin with, 40 plus half strength, half agility means that a starting level character will have a 50% daze chance, and that's actually pretty good.
Yeah, this one definitely looks up there in skills, and another very interesting one, as it again is doing a negative modifier to your damage, much like Hail of Blows does. The daze chance is definitely nice. It seems like it's basically a skill that will give you a little bit of breathing room if you are getting into a really rough position in a battle, and that you can retreat. And not only can you retreat, but you can be rest assured that you are not going to get attacked as soon as you retreat backwards. So you could almost use this as well just to get out of a bad situation, to run to the side of the map if you're ambushed by wolves, or if you're taking on a boss or a bunch of enemies that are a little bit too strong for you.
I like the hidden bonus of negative 15% fumble chance, probably to help prevent you from actually failing to deal damage with this. But it doesn't actually have a hidden accuracy bonus. So what that kind of means is that it wants you to focus on what the actual abilities do. So the ability energy cost is kind of like the cherry on top. What we're really focusing on is that daze chance and the retreating ability. The combination of the ability from that is from athletics, right? That one athletics ability that allows you to retreat without attacks of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been plenty of times where it's like I find myself too close to my opponent and I don't actually want them to be able to hit me as I kind of walk away from them. If you can use that daze chance to lead into a stun, let's say you somehow daze them and then use this to finish them off on the daze chance to be put in the stun, because if you daze a daze, they get stunned. Then you can use this to basically walk away. So this is really good against single opponents, I feel. But it can hit all surrounding enemies. So it's just a very unique combination. That's why I say that. It's a unique combination of a multitude of different abilities. And the fact that it's a whirlwind, it's a daze, it's a retreat, and it's a buff because you get the 10% energy ability energy cost reduction. So it's a very unique ability, and it's kind of like, obviously we use it for the retreat more than anything, right? We're not actually using this to try and hit all enemies. It's not got it doesn't have a damage boost, so it's actually harder to use this offensively. This is purely a defensive ability, but it's still capable of dealing a bunch of damage. So it's really interesting. I find myself not using this as often as I should, but maybe it's because I'm not finding it in situations where it's my go-to thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and looking at it too, just in comparison to Step Aside, it seems like if you get set up favorably with doing Peacemaker and you back up and let's say you daze the enemies, you might want to just pop off Step Aside to rush back at them and knock them down even harder. It just seems like all of the trees in here are. It's almost like a more effective at being a two-handed weapon than greatsword is, and how many abilities can actually knock enemies multiple tiles or hit multiple enemies in one go.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It just makes me want to do a build with Staves, which I haven't attempted yet, but reading through this, it just seems like that would be an awesome time, just kind of like with maces, but even more powerful. But,
well, that's debatable.
Yeah, I'm sure. So we'll move on to the final passives on the tree, the bottom of the trees, and looking over these before, I actually think we're in sort of the same situation as as looking at spears. So first we have Now or Never. Successful blocking with Staves grants plus 33% counter chance for the next turn. This affects stacks, and it has the standard 5% cooldown duration for the skill tree, and the additional passive bonus of plus 7 block power. What do you think of this one, Darley?
So, the passive bonus, I think this is the only one I've ever seen that actually grants block power. To my mind, I can't actually think of any right now that also additionally grants block power. This might be the only one, right? Have you ever seen it?
I could only think that maybe Shields or maybe even Greatsword has a plus to block power in the passives, but I haven't looked through all those trees.
Yeah, I can't think of one, and I feel like
Me
that's
neither.
wrong. I feel like it's wrong to say that. You know what I mean? But it's the only one I can think of. But successfully blocking gives, 33% counter, and it stacks. I mean, you block 2 in a row, you have a 66% counter chance, So this has the ability to basically make you into a counterattack machine, which is great. But it doesn't actually give you any block percentage. And I feel like this is what is maybe holding it back in my mind, right? Like, when you have a crit ability for a passive, it tends to give you crit, When you have a knockback passive, it has something related to the knockback. We're not getting any block percentage from this, which is why I find it to be very weird, And if you don't have a blocking staff, right, or you don't have any points invested into strength, this would be pretty useless because you have to block. If you don't block, this is pretty useless. So I actually rate this one a little lower than I would normally. I would say like 2 to 3, actually.
Yeah, I mean, this one definitely, in my mind, comes down pretty low. I mean, there's a lot of danger, and we could probably have a full discussion on different types of modifiers on your character, but counter chance, I always feel that there's a lot of danger in doing a lot of countering. Just because while you can counter, the enemy can also counter your counter, and it can chain into something terrible where you end up dying. But I agree also on the block power is quite strange because when you get a modifier to get crit chance, you get crit chance, you don't get plus crit efficiency. So because that basically what comes to mind when I see block power is the complement to block chance, just like crit efficiency is the complement to crit chance. So I would think block chance would make more sense on this one. Block power is nice to have, especially if you are a high blocking character. But like you said, if you're not going for a high block build, which looking at the other skills in the tree, staves don't really. I mean, intuitively, if you think of a stave, you think that would be a pretty good blocking tool. Especially if somebody's swinging a sword at you, you could have a huge chunk of wood just to block it. But if you look at the other trees, they really don't scream, hey, this is a defensive weapon. It's more, hey, this is a weapon that you're going to just smack the crap out of everybody that you see.
I actually feel a little bit of disdain towards that block power, because when you get block power as an enchant, it's never less than 10, it seems like. At least it has been for me. I'm not saying it can't go below 10. I'm just saying that it's very easy to get a high amount of block power by having enchants. And you know, this ability does not keep up with that. It just doesn't. So what you're really looking at is successful blocking with staves gives 33% counter chance. That's really cool, but like we said, you got to have that block percent. I really wish the passive bonus was a block percent and not a block power bonus. If it was, my mind would probably change drastically about this ability. But since that is not the case, I that's how I feel.
Yeah, I agree. This is probably it sounds like we both rate this one probably one of the lowest on the tree.
Mm-hmm.
I did think it was interesting to note that since you brought up the block power enchantment, I checked the wiki. This is actually the only enchantment, I guess, attribute, whatever you want to call it, that's based off the item level, not a fixed percentage. It's actually whatever the item level -1, as opposed to most of the others are between a percentage range or just a number range. So I just thought I'd throw that out there as kind of interesting trivia on the game.
Can you say that again? I'm not sure I followed you there.
So the stronger the weapon is, and you can check in your save file as well, the higher the weapon is, the higher its level is. So what the enchantment does is it gives plus block power based on the level of the item, not based on a random percentage or a random number.
Oh, if you enchant it.
Yeah, if you're just because you had said how you hadn't seen a block power under level 10.
Mm-hmm.
It might be because the enchantments are going on high level items. But I do agree. It does feel like that +7 is not very high, especially if you were to have really high level weapons.
Yeah. Because we're not going to waste enchant scrolls on crap items. I mean, if you got to that point, you're pretty desperate for a good item.
Yeah.
So it's almost insulting to try and say that if you build towards this, right, that block power is going to have any meaning, because you're going to be wanting block percentage and you're going to be wanting block power. And once you get to a certain block power, you really don't need any more, because at that point you're just blocking the majority of attacks, and then walking 5 steps and healing whatever you didn't manage to actually block. So
yep, no, I agree. And it's funny to segue into the final skill, because this probably is one of the best passives. I know we've said that a lot in the podcast, but just reading through it, the final passive we'll go through is called Triumph. Killing enemies with staves grants plus 20% crit chance for 7 turns. This effect stacks. It has the typical minus 5% cooldown duration for skills in the tree, and it also grants the passive bonus of plus 5% weapon damage. What do you think of this one, Darley?
So my reaction to this when I first read it was, what the flying frick is this passive? This passive alone made me want to play Staves, period. Because when you combo this with the other passive that gives you energy back, you can basically spam abilities all day because you're going to have such a high crit. You're critting all the time. You're getting all of your energy back. So if you get all your energy back and you're using all your abilities, you're basically killing things faster. If you kill things faster, then you get more crit. If you get more crit, you get your energy back. If you get more energy back, you get more abilities back. It reminds me of that commercial back in the late 90s, which was an advertisement against cocaine. It's about a guy who was like, I have to do cocaine to go do my job, to get more money, to get more cocaine. It's kind of like this loop. But that's not even the best part. The best part is 20% crit chance. What were they thinking? And it stacks? It's crazy.
Yeah, you could be doing especially this skill makes me think once you get this passive, screw the dungeons. You're just going to be looking for ambushes. You're just going to be looking for guys to come take you on. And the more, the better. Because you kill a few guys. I mean, you kill 5 guys, you got a 100% crit. But that's adding on to whatever crit chance that you already have. So if you have 20, 30, maybe even 40% chance, after you kill a couple guys, I mean, every hit that you do is going to be a critical hit. Reading this, it just does.
Situation.
I agree. It seems ridiculous reading it that this passive exists.
So my ideal situation, right, is we go staves, and athletics, right? You use Hail of Blows to knock an enemy down really quickly. You get plus 20% crit. You already have a relatively high crit, we'll assume, right? So maybe it goes up to 30 to 40%. So you have a very high crit, and it's active for 7 turns. Within 7 turns, if you can reach another enemy and then mow that guy down with your now 40% crit, you get another 7 turns of this, of which it has stacked. So I'm wondering, is this a refresh or does it fall off? That's a big question there. Even if it falls off, as long as you run into multiple enemies, you can keep ramping it up so that you get higher percents of crit to mow down the next guy even faster. If you go athletics, it makes it even easier to reach your next target because you're using your dash basically to get a 3-tile lead onto your next kill target. This could go particularly crazy outside of like the fortress of the Manshire, the human dungeon, and you just mow people down, with those critical attacks. And the entire time, you're getting your active tree abilities cooldowns up, which, by the way, we have a really great gap closer. So now you're dashing and you're using step aside to get to your next target. It's just, it has the ability to really spiral out, especially with the fact that our B&B is a 3-hit combo, and we've been stacking up accuracy anyway. It's a recipe for wondrous disaster, and on top of that, a passive bonus of 5% damage. I mean, this is the reason you want to play Staves. You want Triumph, you want Battle Trance, you want Hail of Blows and Step Aside, and then you just go crazy all over their faces. At least that's my perspective.
It seems like you would just be ping-ponging between enemies, especially like you said, if you're taking on the dungeon outside of Manshire, you'd just be non-stop, one after another, keep them coming. They're running towards you. That's just all the better because you don't have to use you don't have to cover as much ground. Now, this one seems pretty crazy, and just going through the video in general, the staves are screaming out to me even more to test them out. So,
like, I know for our example run over here on the left, we're using a pretty high level character, but I've been critting all day long with Staves. Like, if you've been watching the run, it's crit after crit after crit after crit after crit. And that is because of this ability. This ability is pretty crazy.
Yeah,
Definitely worthwhile. Definitely 5 out of 5. Maybe even 6 out of 5. I would put it that high, but maybe keep me within reason here.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, definitely watching the playthrough, you would say, even with this high-level character, Staves are much more powerful than Spears, but we'll get into that at the end when we do our final judgment. So let's segue into the weapons, the different Staves that are available in the game. All right, so moving on to the Staves, looking at the different weapons that are shown on the wiki page. Before we get started, just a note that the critical hit bonus, as I believe Darlee has said before, for the Stave is that when you hit for critical damage, the Stave cleaves through 3 tiles that are in front of you and replenishes 10% of the character's max energy. So that just goes along with the other skills in the tree. It really just highlights what you're doing with each one of those, especially the one that brings back energy. So starting off, the first one you're going to come across is the Kamek. It's definitely pretty low level. If you can, you probably want to try to get the traveling stave. It's just a tiny bit better in that it provides more properties than the Kamek. Otherwise, going down from there, the healer staff and conjurer staff, those are pretty common finds. I believe the healer staff is always in the hermit's hut. So if you find them, they're not that much better, if at all, from the traveling staff, but they are free staves that you can find. Going down from there, not much more money, you probably want to look at getting the reinforced staff. It does have a huge jump in the amount of damage caused and has some nice properties associated with it, including block chance, armor damage, armor pen, knockback chances plus 7%, which is pretty good. Most of the other staves going down from there, they're really going to focus more on magic damage modifiers, or being able to do different types of additional damage types: shock, fire, poison, arcane, frost, etc. A number of these I don't believe are in the game. They are in the game files, so if you really wanted to. Oh, I think it's the Hermit staff was one of the ones that you'll find in the Hermit's hut.
Yeah, I've found Healer and Hermit. Healer and
also,
Hermit have been the ones I've found. I think I had to be higher level in order to get Hermit to proc, though. So maybe wait.
Yeah, I almost think that too. I've seen either one of them. The Witch's staff, or the Witch staff, is also one that you can find if you go to the Witch's hut, along with the super annoying Witch's hat. But that one isn't too much greater. It does give some bonuses if you are a magic user.
This is nice to find very early on.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably going to be a little bit better, especially if you're a magic user, compared to the Kamek, if you don't want to drop the money on getting the traveling staff or the reinforced staff. Otherwise, like I said, the majority of these, I don't believe are implemented in the game yet. I believe Darlee said that he has seen them in the hero sarcophagus, but realistically, once you get past reinforced staff, you can look at, I know that you'll be able to find the Geomancer staff or the Pyromancer staff. Those have a lot of really good modifiers, aside from just adding to spell damage. And if you're lucky enough to find the Necromancer staff, you'll find that taking on the Necromancers in the crypt. And I have seen that dropped one time so far through all my playthroughs, so it is possible to get.
So you were able to get Necromancer?
Yeah, I currently have one on Jorgrim, though I do not use Staves, so it is It's just a nice decoration in my chest, and it looks very cool.
Who did it drop off of?
The necromancer in the crypt. I don't know. I think
That's
it was
the
just
old
the
man
weird
one, right? Or is that the bald one?
It was the thinner one. I've been thinking he kind of looks like Mr. Burns compared to the other ones, like fatter.
Okay.
So I think it's like the same chances off of either one. I mean, they're both necromancers, so I think on top of that, if you scroll to the bottom, there seems to be a supremacy of flame type weapon for the staves in the Sangvis Illumination. I did spawn that one. It looks really cool. The animation behind it is very similar to the flame supremacy with the fire. That glowing pinkish purple color. It does the same kind of effect, only a wider compared to the flame supremacy. But like flame supremacy, it has no stat points. So if you get it, keep that in mind. You'll not get any bonuses on it. What do you think, Darley?
I like the guard on it. It makes it look like a two-handed sword.
Yeah, it looks sick. I mean, just holding it too. Just the animation looks cool. It's like holding the flame supremacy. You just feel like it's just right, you know.
Mm-hmm. My additional thoughts on what you said basically is that you can break the staves down in two. Staves are either used as a melee option, in which they will have block chance, block power, or some other assortment of abilities. Typically dealing with crushing, so we're going to see daze and we're going to see stun on some of them. But there's also a wide variety to staves. Like, for example, Healer's Staff, it's not really one of either of those, but it's still really useful to have. It's useful in the way that a shovel is useful. Especially if you have this with the Plague Doctor mask, you can just sit down and recover very, very quickly and get back to fighting. In fact, if you have Plague Doctor and Healer's Staff on your offhand, or basically your offset, you can switch between that. And you don't even really need healing salves at that point. You just sit and rest, and you'll get it all back. You'll get all your damage back very, very quickly. The best melee staff in the game, I think you had mentioned earlier, was the Geomancer staff. It is a magic staff, and it is probably your best option for using it as a melee weapon because it gives block, power, daze, and stun, and it has a base of 29 damage. Very nice to use, and it has 3% knockback. And it's good for Geomancy. So definitely one of the better staves in the game. I've never seen the Necromancer drop, but I definitely believe you. I feel like they're going to be tied to certain things. Mm-hmm. For example, I know the Orient Staff, which is what we've been using in our demo, is in the game. Because it's part of the Hero Sarcophagus loot table. And if you go in and farm it out, you should be able to get it in game. And this would be really good for a energy efficient, maybe high willpower to get some of this fire, shock, and arcane damage up. But energy drain, natural 25%, that's really good. Sure, you can't use the Arcanist power, but do you really need to? I mean, it has a very nice high base damage of 28, and a very, very nice energy drain. You'll be super energy efficient with it on. So
I was going to point out with the Geomancer staff, if you do go that route, you might even want to drop a few points into Geomancy. The runic, I think it's the runic boulder, the first skill, and stone armor are definitely good skills to have and do not require a big commitment into the Geomancy tree.
Yeah. And Geomancy should just typically pair very well with anything that does knockback, because then you get that stunning effect. So I would definitely say Geomancer staff would be at least a few points investment in the Geomancy, if nothing else for the rock armor. So
yeah, and
that's my
like
take
you
on
said,
that.
you can set up the boulder. So if you're out in the middle of the field and you have nothing to knock back against, well, you can create your own surface to knock back the enemy against.
Mm-hmm. The other staves of real import is Pyromancer Staff. Super good for fire builds, because it comes with an inherent bonus range of 1. Stack that on with your Perception 15, and you will be able to melt stuff very far away, and it has a very nice pyromantic bonus to that, as well as energy bonus. Definitely one of the ones you want to try and find. I believe it's in-game. It should be.
I'm pretty sure I've seen that one, either for sale or somewhere.
I've never seen Venomancer. I've never seen Orcish stuff in general.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've seen Shaman. The one I'm dying to get a hold of, but I don't think it's in the game. I've asked people, is Chronomancer. Chronomancer has a minus 33% cooldown duration. Holy crap. I don't care if I don't have chromatic powers. I want that for a fire build so I can spam Fire Nova.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
But that's pretty much all I have to say about staves. You're basically going to be looking for the Orient if you can farm it out, or you're going to be looking for Geomancer for physical, or if you're going magic, in particular at the moment, Pyromancer. All of those are probably the best options right now.
All right, guys. So this is actually embarrassing. This is post-recording. We realized we didn't actually pick our favorite weapon. We just went straight into the outros. So starting off, I would say between the two, I would definitely have to go with spears. Mostly because I have a lot of experience, but I just enjoy the skill tree in itself, though it is a rather difficult choice to make. I do like stabbing people from a great distance, and that final passive really is just the really clinches it for me as far as this one being superior to Staves. What do you think, Darley?
I'm conflicted for this one, as I usually am when it comes to choosing one that is my favorite or which one is more powerful. So I want to like Staves better. I feel like the combination on it is very strong, but I've in addition to my own experiences, as well as watching like a Pallid Knight for a while there, tried very, very hard to make Staves work, and he just kept dying over and over and over. And when he finally got it to work, it was awesome, but it took him a lot of deaths to do it. But it can be really hard to get up to the point where you feel powerful with Staves. And you definitely lack a lot of starting power, because the bread and butter on it has a negative damage bonus, and it's hard to kill enemies super quick sometimes. So I think I will agree with you. Spears overall seems a lot safer and a lot more powerful. You get to control your opponent very easily, even though there is no tried and true gap closer. That is one negative of spears. It feels strong overall, and I feel like it's very, very nice to play over struggling with Staves. That being said, Staves are really strong too. Don't neglect it. Definitely play it if you have some time. I feel like Staves could be compared to Great Swords in a lot of ways, and Great Swords, to a certain degree, does it more efficiently. But nothing is as... what Great Swords lacks is knockback and energy efficiency. And Staves, if nothing else, is super energy efficient, has really fairly low cooldowns, and is a lot of fun to play. So don't write it off, but I will also pick spears as being better.
Yeah, they're definitely both fun to play. I always think it's funny because when you're looking at them, the spear is basically just a staff with the pointy end on it. So in those regards, it does become superior, though staves do typically tend to be a lot thicker than spears. But I would say even just from a power standpoint, you're probably going to wreck in the game if you were to be a spear person against someone with the staff. It's going to be a lot easier to take them down. But yeah, both are very fun to play. Definitely don't knock either one. If you played spears, go try staves. You will have a lot of fun with it.
I think what it really comes down to is spears has not only those really, really strong passives, like we said about on the Keystone one, that shreds HP, but they have a wide variety of actives that are just very useful overall. And when you have 2 bread and butter attack skills, forget about it. You're controlling your opponent all the time. When you're not controlling your opponent, you're bleeding him out, or you're doing other bad stuff to him. It's strong. And I don't think I've ever heard of anyone complain about the strength of spears, whereas I have heard of complaints about the strength of staves, or rather, how hard it is to get it going.
Yeah, and I have seen a number of people say that spears are overpowered, but hopefully they don't get nerfed in any future updates. Can keep our fingers crossed on that.
Yeah, I don't think they will. It's definitely one of those trees that has a lot more choices because it's 10 versus compared to 8. But most of those choices are going to be good. I feel like we only said a few were basically not really worth taking at any point. So compare that to the long game, you're pretty good.
Agreed. Yep. So from here, we'll wrap up the podcast. I just wanted to sign out by saying thanks everyone for watching. Make sure you give us a like, subscribe to both of our channels. Give as much support as you can. We are planning to do more of these. We will take any requests to do number 4. We don't have anything currently planned though. I think we're looking at we could do range crossbow versus bow, or we could start looking at two-handed weapon versus dual wielding versus shield, pyromancy versus geomancy. There's any number of topics, and even stuff not related to any specific skill tree. We will probably look at doing an episode on it in the future. But as I said, thanks for watching. This is Beardodood signing out.
And this is DarLeeLlama. Don't forget to check out all of our vids. They come out on their respective schedules. I don't know if you actually have a schedule yet, do you?
I don't have a specific schedule. I try to space out between doing other Let's Tries or trying other games, but I usually try to keep at least 3 videos in a row. So I usually have at least 5 or 6 come out in the week for Stoneshard.
I know you started playing a recent game. I know it's a bit off topic to say so, but Mortal Coil, so be sure to go check out that video of his.
It's Mortal Shell.
Oh, Mortal Shell.
Yeah, they just released open beta because there was such high demand. It was closed beta. If you're a fan of Dark Souls, this is an indie studio that's building their own Souls-like game. The combat mechanics are very interesting and very unforgiving. It's very timing based on your attacks. So if you get the timing wrong, you pretty much ruin the whole run. So I had a lot of fun playing it. So yeah, definitely. If you like those games, either go download it on the Epic Store or just watch my video. I play through the first 2 areas almost entirely, very close.
And then I am starting up a Tangle Deep run. Tangle Deep being very much like Stoneshard, so be sure to check that out. I hope you had fun watching us as we did playing and talking to you. Be sure to hit like and subscribe to help us, and leave a comment if you have something to say. That being said, DarLeeLlama signing off. Take care, stay safe, have a wonderful day, and we will see you next time.
Peace.